Tomorrow, I'm going somewhere extraordinary. I'm traveling back to the Paris imagined by the 19th century itself.
And before we continue this journey, thank you so much to every single one of our subscribers. Every day we're working harder to bring you the best historical content possible here.
Get ready, because this journey is going to be absolutely epic. Before this era, nights in most European cities were ruled by silence and fear. But Paris is slowly teaching itself how to remain alive after sunset. For the first time in history, people are beginning to trust cities at night. You can actually feel the city changing psychologically. Paris is beginning to realize that the night no longer belongs entirely to darkness.
For most of history, producing fabric required enormous amounts of manual labor. Machines like these were beginning to change everything.
Factories like this were beginning to produce fabric on a scale humanity had never seen before.
The textile industry was one of the first places where humanity truly experienced industrial-scale production.
Before, clothing was expensive, slow to produce, and limited.
The world was becoming more connected than ever before, and ports like this were helping drive the explosion of global trade.
Navigation was becoming increasingly scientific. Ships were no longer guided only by instinct and tradition, but by mathematics, engineering, and precise mapping. These ships carried far more than cargo. They connected entire continents into one expanding global economy. For thousands of years, ships depended almost entirely on the wind. Steam power was about to change the oceans forever. The oceans were becoming highways of industrial civilization, and the world was beginning to shrink. For most of history, crossing the ocean involved enormous uncertainty. Instruments like these were beginning to change that. Accurate timekeeping changed the oceans forever. Sailors could finally calculate their position with far greater precision. Navigation was becoming one of humanity's greatest scientific achievements. Mathematics itself was guiding ships across entire oceans. Every improvement in navigation made the world feel smaller, and global trade became faster, safer, and more predictable. The oceans were no longer completely mysterious. Science was beginning to map and measure the world itself.
For most of human history, diseases like smallpox killed millions with almost no defense. Vaccination was about to change medicine forever. This idea sounded almost unbelievable at the time, that a disease could be prevented scientifically before it even began. People today often forget how terrifying smallpox once was. This invention gave humanity its first real scientific defense against epidemic disease. Vaccination changed medicine permanently. For the first time, humanity learned how to scientifically stop a deadly disease before it spread. Few inventions in history would save more human lives than this one.
For centuries, many people explained the world through superstition. But here in Paris, science is beginning to reorganize reality itself.
What feels normal to us today, experimentation, measurement, and scientific testing, was still revolutionary thinking at this time.
Humanity was beginning to realize that the universe could be measured, calculated, and understood through reason. Medicine was still limited and often dangerous, but people were beginning to study the human body scientifically instead of relying only on inherited belief. For most of history, engineering was based largely on tradition. But Paris was beginning to treat it as an exact science. The Enlightenment wasn't only about science. It was about believing human reason itself could reshape society.
For people in 1800, instruments like these must have felt almost magical. But they represented something new, measurable reality. The Enlightenment transformed science into something social. Ordinary people were beginning to see knowledge itself.
Paris was beginning to believe that humanity could understand, organize, and even improve the world through reason itself.
For thousands of years, humanity tried to explain the universe through myths and superstition. But here in Paris, reason is beginning to take control.
Science was beginning to move from philosophy into experimentation. Knowledge now had to be tested, measured, and proven. Human beings were beginning to realize that the universe operated through laws, not mysteries. Medicine was still dangerous and limited, but Paris was becoming one of the places where modern scientific medicine slowly began taking shape.
Paris was not only changing how people lived, it was changing how humanity understood truth, reality, and knowledge itself.
For most of history, economies were unstable and fragmented. Institutions like this were beginning to centralize financial power on a national scale. This is where modern centralized finance truly begins to emerge. Banking was becoming a tool for controlling entire national economies. Credit was becoming one of the invisible engines powering the modern economy. Money itself was starting to move differently.
Modern nations would eventually depend on systems like this. Finance and government were becoming inseparable.
Most people walking these streets could not yet imagine it, but systems like this would eventually shape the entire global economy. Keeping a city illuminated once required hundreds of people fighting darkness by hand, every single night. Paris in 1800 feels like humanity standing with one foot still trapped in the Middle Ages, and the other already reaching toward the future.
For most of human history, ordinary people had what was happening beyond their own town.
These cafes are becoming something completely new. Physical social networks where entire political movements can begin with conversation.
For the first time, thousands of strangers are beginning to think about the same events at the exact same moment.
For the first time in history, thousands of ordinary people are beginning to wake up every morning searching for information about the world beyond their own streets.
Paris is beginning to develop something completely new, mass public opinion. Entire crowds are now emotionally reacting to the same information at the same time.
This city is becoming obsessed with information. Everyone wants to know what is happening before everyone else.
For most of history, people feared armies and kings.
But now governments are beginning to fear information itself.
This is the beginning of the modern information age, a world where ideas can spread through an entire city faster than ever before.
Paris no longer feels isolated from the rest of the world. Information is beginning to connect entire populations together. You can feel how information is control emotion itself. Fear, hope, and uncertainty are now This city is becoming obsessed with information. Everyone wants to know what is happening before everyone else.
For thousands of years, most people live disconnected from global events. But Paris is beginning to experience something entirely new, collective awareness.
Mass information is changing how people see themselves. They no longer think only as individuals or neighborhoods, but increasingly as part of a nation. This feels like the birth of the modern connected world, not through electricity or technology yet, but through information itself.
For centuries, cities mostly grew through chaos. But Paris is beginning to experiment with something new, planned urban design.
Projects like this were changing how people moved, traded, and experienced the city itself.
The idea that a city could be consciously designed and engineered was still incredibly new at this time.
This may seem simple today, but wider, organized streets were radically changing how cities functioned.
Paris still looks medieval in many places, but you can already see the first outlines of the modern city beginning to emerge.
Cities for most of history were not planned for human comfort. They simply expanded wherever people could build.
For centuries, governments often ruled through chaos and local power. But Napoleon was building something far more centralized and systematic. Infrastructure was beginning to shape behavior itself. Wider roads changed commerce, transportation, and even how people psychologically experienced the city.
Public spaces like this were becoming symbols of a new idea, that governments could redesign cities intentionally instead of leaving them to evolve randomly.
These cafes weren't just places to drink coffee. They were becoming the social operating system of modern Paris. Entire artistic movements could begin in rooms exactly like this. Paris was turning conversation itself into cultural power.
Some of the most important political decisions in Europe were not born inside palaces, but inside cafes like this.
Paris didn't become the intellectual capital of Europe by accident. These cafes connected minds together in ways the world had never seen before.
Power in Paris no longer moved only through palaces. It now moved through conversations.
This level of administrative coordination was incredibly advanced for the early 19th century. France was becoming a highly organized modern state.
Paris in 1800 feels almost like a living brain. Thousands of conversations constantly exchanging ideas across the city.
Entire artistic revolutions were born from exhausted people arguing late into the night inside places exactly like this. For people living in 1800, this level of military organization must have felt almost futuristic. Paris didn't just build cafes. It built one of the first modern ecosystems where ideas could circulate endlessly without stopping. This doesn't feel medieval anymore. It feels like the beginning of modern military command systems.
Napoleon turned war into something industrial in scale. Entire populations were now being organized into military systems.
To people living in 1800, this must have looked like the future of warfare itself.
In modern terms, these cafes functioned almost like physical social media platforms, where information, influence, and power moved from table to table. This empire moved through information almost as much as through soldiers. Faster communication was changing warfare forever. This army operates less like medieval warriors, and more like a coordinated machine.
To much of Europe, Napoleon's army must have felt less like an old kingdom's military and more like the arrival of a completely new era.
This may not look revolutionary at first, but centralized administration would eventually reshape almost every modern state on Earth.
This empire moved through information almost as much as through soldiers. Faster communication was changing warfare forever. The Napoleonic Code would eventually influence legal systems across much of the modern world. This room helped redefine how nations understood law itself.
Napoleon didn't modernize war only through soldiers. He modernized it through science, engineering, and organization.
This was more than government reform. It was the construction of the modern administrative state. For the first time, millions of people were increasingly being managed through the same organized legal and administrative structure. Most people imagine modernity as machines and factories, but systems like this change the world just as much.
Before systems like this, justice often depended heavily on local traditions and privilege. Napoleon was helping standardize law across an entire nation.
This was the beginning of the planned city, the moment governments started imagining that entire urban environments could be redesigned intentionally. Modern governments would eventually depend on systems exactly like this, and centralized records became a new form of power.
This changed everything. Humanity was learning how to create artificial industrial power for the first time. Before this, most energy came from animals, rivers, or human labor. Steam engines were the beginning of mechanical civilization.
People in this era were witnessing something almost unbelievable. Machines were beginning to generate power by themselves. This was the birth of industrial production. Steam power was multiplying human labor on an unimaginable scale. Steam power was not just a machine. It was the birth of the industrial world.
Human civilization was entering a new era. For the first time, machines themselves were becoming Most people here still cannot imagine it yet. But steam power will eventually move entire civilizations.
For thousands of years, cities sounded mostly human and animal. Industrial civilization was beginning to create an entirely new soundscape.
Steam engines were not just machines. They were humanity's first true industrial power source.
This was the moment humanity stopped depending only on nature and began creating industrial power for itself.
Industrial textile production was changing more than factories. It was changing how ordinary people dressed, consumed, and lived.